Hi everyone, welcome to Ask a Property Manager episode number 42. Shout out to Douglas Adams and shout out to you if you understood those last two references. Today's October 14th, 2020, and I'm coming to you live from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc., and on today's show we're going to be talking about what the work from home shift is going to look like for the long term in the real estate markets. We're also going to be looking at when it's time to hire an accountant, and of course we'll be answering some questions from housing providers around the country. Before we jump into that, we're going to go ahead and plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Usually those you will find those live on our Facebook page. Those also get posted to YouTube the same day, so you can catch the replay there. Don't forget you can grab a free 30-minute consult over at ownbuffalo.com. I do have a couple of time slots available tomorrow, and then I have some slots open next week as well. Last but not least, don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. New episodes of the podcast drop every Thursday morning. This week we are going to be looking at, I believe we're looking at accepting Section 8 vouchers, how to work with your tenants when there's a major maintenance issue that pops up, and what to do when you get complaints from neighbors. So new episode every Thursday, over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. So we've got a couple of news articles here. The first one is actually going to be more relevant if you're a Buffalo viewer. And this is coming out of Buffalo's Business First. The AMNA's project is heading back to the Buffalo Planning Board. This is exciting especially for locals. Like, I can remember being a kid, the AMNA's building was like a destination for us because I lived out, in the country, and the AMNA's building in downtown Buffalo, that was their flagship store. And it was always really cool to go and check out around Christmas time. They always had cool displays in the front window and stuff like that. It felt very much like a scene from A Christmas Story, if you're familiar with that movie. So anyways, moving forward here, this project has basically been plagued by issues for an extended period of time. It was purchased by a group of investors from China several years back. They had started the process of doing asbestos and lead abatement, which it ballooned the cost of the project substantially. I don't know exactly what happened, if they wound up running out of money or just no longer had the financial support for the project or whatever the case may be. But when they had the project, the intent was to actually make it into a hotel. Obviously, the bottom has kind of fallen out of the hospitality industry, which I think has also led to this shift into this new project. But the property has been reacquired by a new group out of Flushing, New York. It also appears to be international investors that are, sponsoring the project, and the scope of the project has changed quite a bit as well. So it's no longer going to be hotel space. It's now going to be apartments, mixed use essentially, apartments and offices. We'll go ahead and jump into the article here for some more information. The latest sign of forward movement at the Adam, Meldrum, and Anderson Co. Project is a meeting between the development team and Buffalo Planning Board on October 19th. The purpose is to discuss a revised blueprint for the 10-story, $70 million makeover of the former department store. Planning board approval is necessary for the 377 Main Street project, which has been stalled for about 2 years. We know what this means to Buffalo, said Sam Savarino, whose firm, Savarino Companies, is overseeing the construction. I'm reminded of it every time my phone rings. After months of negotiations among City of Buffalo and various utility companies, work has started on repairing and strengthening the underground vault on Washington Street between the former AMNA's building and the warehouse. That work closed Washington Street between Eagle and South Division to vehicular traffic for more than a year. This was a big issue in the city of Buffalo. This was widely talked about. David Dorr and Paula Blanchard from Howard Hanna Commercial Real Estate have been retained to find office tenants for the 128,000 square feet of office space on 4 floors. And 13,000 square foot of street-level retail or restaurant space. Restaurant would be really cool in that location because you basically have direct access to the metro line, which is pretty cool. On the top 5 floors will be 33 market-rate apartments, some as large as 2,700 square foot. That's a pretty sizable apartment. We're talking about a solid reuse plan and not some pie-in-the-sky dream, Savarino said. 377 Main Realty LLC, which lists Flushing, New York as its corporate address and is made up of Chinese investors, is the new owner of the building and immediately discarded the older plans for a 330-room Wyndham Hotel. The group renamed the building as the J.N. Adam in honor of James Adams, a Buffalo businessman, and the city's 45th mayor. Silvestri Architects will do the design work. They've got a really good team attached to this project with Silvestri and Savarino. If they have the proper financing, there's no doubt in my mind that Silvestri and Savarino can get this project to the finish line and really bring back a local landmark here in the Buffalo area. Hopefully that's where we wind up on this when all is said and done. I'm super excited to watch the progress of this building. And really, it's kind of like watching a piece of my childhood come back around. So that's pretty exciting for me. The second article I wanted to touch on is out of CNBC. This was written by Jessica Bersetinsky. Nope, butchered that one. And this was in regards to the work from home movement. So Dropbox is the latest San Francisco tech company to make remote work permanent. I don't know if I'm going to read this entire article, but there are some points that I want to highlight. San Francisco-based Dropbox announced on Tuesday that it will stop asking employees to come into offices and instead make remote work the standard practice even after the coronavirus pandemic ends. Remote work outside the office will be the primary experience for all employees and the day-to-day default for individual work. For employees who need to meet or work together in person, the company is setting up Dropbox studios in San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, and Dublin when it's safe to do so. The company extended its mandatory work from home policy through June 2021. Skipping ahead now, Dropbox had more than 2,800 employees as of December 31st, which is probably a thing that would be very relevant to note. More companies are starting to consider remote work as a more permanent option due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Twitter and Square are letting employees work from home forever, while Microsoft said workers will have more flexibility to work from home. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg predicted in May that 50% of employees will be working remotely within the next decade. Without the pressure to go into the office every day, some people have chosen to move out of Silicon Valley and look for more affordable and larger options. That's pushing down the cost of rental housing in San Francisco, historically the most expensive place to live in the area. And that pretty much wraps the article up. This is actually really interesting to me. And the reason I say that is because I think that the work from home world is here to stay for a variety of reasons. Let me jump back here to full screen video. So you're starting to see it already. The places that I'm seeing it the most are Los Angeles, West Coast, big cities. Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, and East Coast big cities, New York, Boston. Maybe Chicago to a lesser extent. I don't know much about the Chicago market, if I'm being fair, you know. Essentially what's happening is we're seeing people who are trying to move out of larger cities into areas that they feel more comfortable in. Whether that means, you know, they don't want to be in the big city because pandemic concerns, or they don't want to be in the big city because they're no longer required to be there for work. You know, the commute's no longer a thing. People will and are already moving to areas that they feel more comfortable living in. They're going to be willing to commute infrequently back to the office. So we're finding there are a lot of people who, you know, maybe they have to go to the office 1 or 2 days a week, but they're work from home the rest of the time. They're willing to take that longer commute because they know that the days that they don't have to commute, they have that much more time in their day because they don't have the commute, essentially. So I think you're going to see that people are willing to commute a little bit more. I think people are really searching for value for their dollar at this point. I think that we're already seeing it. Like, our market is strong here in Buffalo, like city proper, in terms of residential real estate. But we are seeing, you know, the suburban stuff and the more rural stuff is starting to climb in price as people are making shifts in where they want to live and their lifestyle choices and things of that nature. And a lot of times people are moving, not necessarily because they don't want to be in the city, but because they see more value for their money. You know, they're looking to change school districts for their children. They want access to different resources, whether it be, you know, it could be anything, really. It could be different schools. It could be parks and recreation. It could be just not having to sit in traffic. I mean, look at the traffic in Los Angeles. They might just be a situation where they don't want to sit in the traffic of Los Angeles anymore, and now they don't have to. So there's a lot of different options out there for a certain type of person. Obviously, if you're working at a place where you have to report every day, so, you know, you're a manufacturing type facility or something like that, that's not a type of a situation where you're going to be working from home. But, you know, by and large, a lot of stuff is not manufactured in our country anymore. We're geared more towards a service-based industry, and especially with the tech startups. Obviously, in the article we were looking at, it's all tech companies that you're seeing. It's Dropbox, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's companies like that. But there are other examples out there. For instance, Geico, which you would traditionally think, Buffalo has a big facility for Geico. Geico is a big employer in this region, and they have a monster facility with a ton of employees. And they do several different operations. They've got, insurance sales, they've got claims and things like that out of this facility. But a lot of those people are now being moved to a work from home type scenario. Same thing with, we have a lot of banking call centers in our area. A lot of that stuff is shifting to a work from home type setup, which gives you a lot more flexibility. In terms of like bigger names that I've seen that are making the move, obviously you've got people like Joe Rogan, who moved from Los Angeles to Texas. I don't know, Austin, Texas, maybe, I think he moved to. That's a big move. Like, Joe Rogan is a large name in the podcasting world and obviously the comedy and MMA worlds. For him to make a move from a major city like Los Angeles to Texas, that's something that garners attention. Even here in New York, we've had Governor Cuomo has come out and said that we are losing, high income earners out of the state. They're moving to places, where they don't have to be in close proximity to people, things like that, but it's a loss of tax revenue in that instance. And actually, the one that struck me as the most interesting, because he posted a video about it that went a little bit more in depth, was Graham Stephan. And if you're not familiar with him, you can certainly look him up. He's all over YouTube. But he's making the move from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. He put out a video and he cited several reasons. And I watched the video and I thought that it was very well done. He documented his reasons and he explained the reasons that he was looking to make his move. And it came down to basically 4 big points. Number one was taxes. He pays a lot of taxes in California that he would not necessarily be subject to if he was to move to Nevada. Number 2, the blight is starting to get overwhelming in Los Angeles. He breaks it down much more than I'm going to break it down here. That's a much deeper topic for, not the scope of this show. It's a much deeper topic that needs a lot of discussion, but it's not the topic for our show. The cost of living in Los Angeles is obviously absurd, which is something that factored into his decision. And traffic was something that he mentioned. Just not having to sit in that traffic all day, every day. He made the move from Los Angeles to Las Vegas because it still keeps him close enough to LA that he can commute back and forth, because he is keeping his rental properties and his businesses and things like that. But at the end of the day, he's in a position where he doesn't necessarily have to be physically present in Los Angeles every day, and that's why he made the move. Even some of my clients have made the move. I have a client that moved from Las Vegas back to New York. It wasn't necessarily as a result of the pandemic. Actually, it definitely wasn't a result of the pandemic, because the moves, the wheels were already in motion well before all that happened. But it's a decision that they're glad that they made. They wanted to get away from a bigger city and they wanted to move back into something more rural. The wife has family here. It just made sense for them to make that move. And I think you're going to see more and more and more of this. Even our company, we're a small company, as far as real estate brokerages go. It's myself and my office manager, and I work here from the office most days. But there are days that I do work from home. And then my office manager, because she's got, younger kids and school and stuff like that, fortunately, we're able to afford the flexibility that she gets to work from home essentially full time. And it's even been a discussion that she's had about, well, maybe now that I'm here full time, maybe it's time for a different size house because the kids are here with blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of people who are having this conversation. I don't think that this is something that's going to go away. I think it's something that's really only going to grow in the long term. And I think that that's one of those types of situations that that it's going to result in a lot of lifestyle changes for a lot of people. So keep watch of it. I think that it's a good thing long term to see this. And I think that it's really going to be one of those things that we look back on it in a few years and say, yeah, why were we ever doing it the other way? So it'll definitely have an impact on residential and commercial values, though. So that's really where the interest lies. Let's move into our questions from housing providers. This one came from actually, I believe all of these came from the Rent Prep from Landlords Facebook group. And this one is about bunnies. We just got asked by a tenant if they could get a bunny. This is a pet-friendly apartment with the exception of cats. Does anyone have experience with bunnies? My answer to you on this would be no. Bunnies poop a lot. And they also chew a lot, especially when they're left unattended. So if you have somebody that has a bunny and they're not properly maintaining the cage, or they're letting it run around the house or the apartment outside of the cage, it's going to start chewing on anything, woodwork, carpets. Bunnies can be pretty destructive, and they do poo a lot. So I would probably say no to a bunny unless it's a situation where they're being maintained in some kind of an outdoor space or something like that. I would not go with the bunnies on this one. I would be anti-bunny. Next question is in regards to when is it time to build out your team, essentially. What is the best resource for getting the most out of my tax deductions being a rental property owner? I own 3 single-family residence rental homes, and I'm trying to decide if it's time to hire outside help to do the taxes. Thank you for any input. Yes, it's time for you to hire an accountant. And not just any accountant. You need to find an accountant that specializes in investment real estate. Accountants unlock so much more than just a couple of tax deductions. And it's a situation where the more you talk to your accountant, the better advice they're going to be able to give you over the course of time. So don't wait until the last minute to find an accountant or call your accountant if you have a question. Have ongoing discussions with your accountant at least once a quarter, because that way they can help advise you, along the way. Planning takes time, really it does. And the ability to know that it's time to start planning something 6 months before you think it's time to start planning for something, that's the type of thing that an accountant can unlock and really help you to get your business on the right path, if you will. It's so much more than just tax deductions. Definitely it's time for you, when you've got 3 rental properties, trying to do it through, TurboTax or something like that. No, it's time to hire a professional accountant that specializes in investment real estate. Ask other local investors who they're using for their accountant. Maybe ask around at a local real estate investors association meeting if you have any of those going on in your area. Local Facebook groups are great, but definitely talk to some other investors in your area. Find out who they're using, get some recommendations, and then start interviewing. But it's definitely time to hire an accountant once you're at the point where you've got 3 single families and you're trying to figure out all of the different tax deductions and expenses, as well as what your plan might be going forward. So definitely jump into a meeting with an accountant at some point in the very near future. Unpaid utilities. I currently have a tenant who is past due on their utilities payment. I received a notice from the city stating that if the amount is not paid in full, it will end up on my property tax as a lien against the property. As a landlord, can I pay for the amount and take my tenant to small claims to recover the amount? So there's a couple things that are missing from this question. So I'm going to have to fill in the blanks. First off, it doesn't say if the tenant's behind on their rent, so I'm going to assume that the tenant's rent is current and they're just not paying this utility. I'm also going to assume that this is a water utility, and the only reason I'm doing that is just because that's what I know locally. We have separate outside non-government owned utility companies for gas and electric in our area, so water is typically the only thing that is handled on a government basis here. So that's why we're going to look at it from the perspective of water, I suppose. You may have a government-controlled electric or gas company utility in your area. It's not real common up here, at least not that I know of. So getting back to the root of the question, as a landlord, can I pay for the amount and take my tenant to small claims to recover? I would say yes, you can pay the amount, and I would say yes, you should pay the amount. You've already said in your question here that it'll end up as a tax lien against your property, and that's accurate here in Western New York as well. It's one of those situations where, if you leave a water bill and it goes unpaid, eventually the water bill will find its way back to your taxes. It gets reassessed onto your taxes, and it can become a lien against the property, which is why we always recommend to property owners that they keep a water bill in their name, even if it's a single family and the tenant's responsible for the water bill. You're better off keeping that utility bill in your name as the property owner so that you know that it's always getting paid, and then back bill it to the tenant whenever that water bill comes up for payment. That's probably the best way to handle it, and it'll really kind of keep you out of some hot water, unintended, I guess, on something like that. So the other thing I would mention would be check your lease to see if you have any language that would allow you to back bill it onto the tenant, onto the tenant's ledger now, or if you can charge it against their security deposit if they move out and have some unpaid utilities at the time of move out. That's a pretty common one, especially with water bills, because at least here in Western New York, they're only getting billed on a quarterly basis. So you might have a tenant that moves out in, October, but the next bill doesn't come out until, end of November or something like that. There's a gap there. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well when it comes to making sure that utility bills are paid through the end of the tenancy, is to check your lease and see, and actually check your state law and see whether or not you can actually go back against the tenant security deposit for an unpaid utility. As for taking the tenant to small claims court, I think you're jumping a couple steps ahead here. Talk to the tenant. There's no mention in here that you've talked to the tenant and they've given you any kind of an excuse or a reason or something like that. That's step one. Talk to the tenant. Set up a payment plan with the tenant. Obviously, go ahead and pay the utility so it doesn't turn into a lien. But if the tenant's having a hard time, set up a payment plan or something like that so that they maybe can't take this whole chunk of utility all at once. Let them break it out over the course of a couple months or something like that if it makes their life a little bit easier. If they're not willing to do any of that, or they default on their payment plan, at that point you're probably going to be looking at a small claims case. And then after that, if you get the judgment, you're going to have to try to collect on the judgment. Whether or not you're going to be able to collect on the judgment is anybody's guess. You can't draw blood from a stone, as they say. And if the tenant just has no means of paying it, then they have no means of paying it. Sending it to collections isn't going to get you really any further. But it's up to you how you want to handle that. It sounds to me like this is something that might be resolvable just by talking to the tenant first, before you go through all of the loops of just going right to a small claims case and everything else. That would be my starting point. Contractor insurance. This is one that we've talked about a couple of times before, but it always is good to refresh. I have a question about requesting insurance from a company before they perform work. I need some concrete poured, and I got an estimate to replace a large part of a sidewalk and a porch from a person who's been posting all over our neighborhood site trying to get business. He seems to be just getting started. I can see that he is licensed, but I don't see any online reviews about him besides his own pictures of his work. And unlike other companies such as HVAC companies where you can search their license and they have their own trucks, etc., I'm not so sure about this person as to whether or not they have insurance. I asked him to send me over the name of his insurance agent so that I can call to make sure that his policy is intact, but he's not responded. Was this too pushy? Did I not ask the question correctly? Is there any other way that I can verify that he has liability insurance, or should I just steer clear? I have a lot to say on this one, especially given the current state of the labor pool here at least here in Western New York, and from other conversations I'm having, it's a nationwide issue by the sounds of things. You are 100% in the right asking to be named, or asking to see his insurance, his general liability insurance. I would take it a step further and ask to be named as an additional insured on his general liability insurance, so that if something goes wrong, it's very clear that number one, that he has insurance, that number two, you were named on his insurance, he was doing work at your property, et cetera, and they'll give you what's called an accord sheet, which will tell you what his insurance limits are and things like that. So that's definitely a good idea to get named as an additional insured, especially if this is a bigger job. But that is one surefire way to know that that guy has insurance. The other nice thing is, this is a concrete job, so you're probably not going to be doing a lot of these. But if you have a handyman that you work with frequently, it's good to have them as an addition. It's good for you to be named as an additional insured on their property policy as well. Simply because if their insurance lapses, you should get a letter in the mail saying that their insurance has lapsed. And then before you use that vendor again, okay, we need to get an updated insurance certificate from this guy to make sure that he's still legit and above board. So get a copy of the general liability insurance at a minimum. Try to get named as an additional insured. I would probably not work with them. We require it for our office. Everybody who works for us has to name us as an additional insured. You might get a little bit more hesitation if it's just a one-off job or something like that. But I would push the envelope there. And I wouldn't stop at the general liability insurance either. So, you're going to have multiple people on this job, which means that they need to have general liability insurance as well as workers' compensation insurance, which is pretty critical, because if somebody gets hurt, you want to make sure that their workers' compensation is up to date. And you should probably also take a look at any licenses that they have to make sure that they're licensed in the municipality that you're working in or the state that you're working in, whatever happens in your state. It's in New York, it's city by city that does the licensing. In New Jersey, I think it's a state license. But make sure that you see their licenses. And that'll give you a pretty good feel that, okay, this guy's probably legitimate. Do not work with unlicensed contractors just to save a few bucks. And this is rampant out there right now because everybody who, was working for a contractor or something along those lines, if they're not still working for that contractor, they were laid off as part of the pandemic or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of guys out there right now, with a toolbox and a pickup truck that are claiming to be contractors, and they are running around. They don't have any of the proper insurances or anything like that. A lot of times they are, taking the money and running. They're, it's really a bad spot right now for a lot of people. There are a lot of people that have been screwed by unlicensed or uninsured contractors, or people who just claim that they're a contractor and take a deposit and then just never show up and do any work. Making sure that you have that insurance and making sure that they have a license, those are a couple of really good steps that you can take to kind of prevent yourself from falling into that same trap. The other thing that I would mention is control the payment schedule on the job. So don't pay out, half of the job up front on a contractor that you're not familiar with, that you've never worked with. It's a situation where they've got to kind of earn in that trust a little bit, I would say. And you might want to go a quarter on your first payment for the down payment on the job or something like that, as opposed to putting out a ton of money, which if they do screw you, you'll never get that cash back. So always, always, always work with insured vendors. Don't work with uninsured vendors, please. You will get screwed. It's just a matter of time. Don't do it. I know it's going to save you a few dollars. Don't do it. You will regret it. That's my soapbox when it comes to insurance. I appreciate you guys listening to my TED Talk there. That pretty much wraps things up for us here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. I love producing Ask a Property Manager, and the best way that you can help us to improve is by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube, so that your question can be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if I brought some value to your day, please do me a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach that many more people. Next week's episode will be live on October 21st, 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be back with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.